Alrighty, folks, welcome back. It's Richard Fish again. Now, moving on to the Second Amendment I have. The Second Amendment, which is, of course, the one that will probably be most heavily discussed, probably most of my videos in regards to this. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people get upset about this, but I believe needs to be an active, open discussion about, changing the Second Amendment. So this is how my augmentation is going to be. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. A firearm is a weapon that fires projectiles at a high velocity. For people to possess and use such firearms, they must have the appropriate license to use such a firearm. If the firearm is one of military use, one must be an active participant in the military or have served more than 2 years without being dishonorably discharged. There are 4 levels of the federal license one must carry to have access and use said firearms. They are as follows. Level 1. One handgun, low caliber, and/or one hunting rifle or shotgun. Rifle and shotgun must be single shot, single pump, and low caliber. Level 2. One handgun, low caliber, and/or 2 hunting rifles and shotgun. Rifles must be single shot and low caliber, while the shotgun must be single pump and/or low and/or high caliber. Level 3. Two handguns, low and high end caliber, and/or two hunting rifles and shotguns. Rifles must be single shot and low and/or high caliber, while the shotgun must be single pump and/or low and high caliber. Free access to level 4, of course, the highest, is free access to military grade weapons and no limit on the number of firearms one has in their possession. Level 3 has a 2-year wait period until they are access to level 4. If one is convicted of a crime, whether it's state or federal, one's license can either be put on hold or revoked. In other words, one without a military background must wait 5 years from the date they acquire their federal license to be able to purchase military-grade weapons. The federal government cannot remove, confiscate firearms from citizens who have not been convicted of federal and/or state crime. Those convicted of federal state crime can have their firearms confiscated at any time. Firearms purchased will be registered in the federal arms inventory. Citizens, when purchasing firearms from dealers, cannot opt out of this requirement. Dealers must register all purchases in the federal arms inventory, lest they become accessories to any crimes committed by firearms purchased from them. To those who have firearms before this revised amendment are not required to register their firearms with the federal government, though they can do it voluntarily if they wish. Those with a military background 3 or more years, those with weapon licenses of 4 or 5 or more years, and legal residents in the United States able to prove that they have safely handled firearms for 4 or more years will be grandfathered into the federal license at no cost if they can provide proof. Basically is that this needs to be a federal license about limiting firearms. Yes, it does sound like a lot of paperwork, but that's the problem is I think the Democrats addressing are people who already have firearms but aren't criminals. They should be given the federal license free of charge because they are not the issue. Let's be honest about that. Those who, I guess the people you call gun nuts, who are all over YouTube and whatnot, they aren't really the problem. They haven't never really been a problem, especially when it comes to gun violence. They are not the issues. And yes, we need a tracking inventory of all the weapons. And yes, those who already have a huge stockpile but are outstanding citizens shouldn't need to be forced to register their weapons because if they're such outstanding citizens, they should be able to keep track of their weapons without having it being tracked. They're the ones tracking their inventory. They should be able to keep all of it. We should not be treating those with massive amount of weapons as potential criminals. I think that's a bit set too far, and easing them into this federal license will help. Now, there is a list of firearms that I have categorized as military. It is a very long list because, well, there are quite a few weapons that an average American should not have. So let's start off with the very long list. An M67 fragmentation grenade, an M14 thermite grenade, an M8 white smoke grenade, an M18 colored smoke grenade, M7A3 CS gas grenade, an M25A2 riot control grenade, M4 riot control grenade, a M83 white smoke grenade, a M84 stun grenade, a M11A1A Flash Crash, an MK141 Mod 0, an M100 Grenade Rifle Entry Munition, a GREM, a Scalable Offensive Hand Grenade, SOCOM, an MK3 3A, 3A1, 3A2 Concussion Grenade, an M25A1, an M7A1A2, M6A1, an MK Mod 0123, an M34, M16, M15, M8, M33, M61, M26A1, MK2, 2A1, aka MK2, 2AA1 Frag, M1 Fraggable, Ketchum Grenade, Civil War era, V40 Mini Grenade, XM48 E1, E2, E3, XM58, X1, EX1 Mod 0, EX2 Mod 0, Model 301-1, Kilgore Skilmurray Stun, T13 Beano Grenade, F1, M1916 Billionth Fuse, M7, 6.8 times 51mm Common Cartridge, U.S. Army, a M16A4, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, USMC, U.S. Army, a M27 1AR Infantry Automatic Rifle, 5.586 times 45 NATO, USMC Automatic Rifleman, a M38 SDMR Squad Designed Marksman Rifle, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, USMC Designated Marksman, a M110A1 SDMR 7.62 times 51mm NATO, U.S. Army Designated Marksman, an MK14 EBR Enhanced Battle Rifle, 7.62 times 51mm NATO, USCG, U.S. Army, USAF Designated Marksman, EOD, an M19 Enhanced Marksman Rifle, 7.62 NATO, USMC Designated Marksman Scout Snipers, MK11 KAC SR-25, 7.62 times 51mm NATO, USMC, US Army, USAF, USCG, USSO COM, USN SEALs, HK417, 7.62 times 51mm NATO, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, USSO COM, SIG SOAR S1716 G2, 7.62 times 51mm NATO, JSOC, MK17 Mod 0, FN SCAR-H, 7.62 times 51mm NATO, USSO COM, USMC Automatic Rifleman, an MRGG-S Giesel Mark 1 Mod 0, 6.5 Creedmoor, USSO COM, MRGG-A LMT MARS-H, 6.5 Creedmoor, USSO COM, FNAL Battle Rifle, trialed as T48 against the T44 and T47 to replace the M1 lost to the former. OLNL Winchester Salvo Rifle, Battle Rifle, 5.56mm Duplex. M1 4E1 Selective Fire Rifle, 7.62 times 51mm NATO. M1 6A3, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, Navy SEALs and USN Seabees. M1 6A2, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, USAF, USCG, and U.S. Army Training Reserve National Guard. M1 6A1, 5.56 times 45mm NATO. M1 16, 5.56 times 45mm NATO. XM16E1, 5.56 times 45mm NATO. M16A2, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, USMC. Heckler and Conk. HK33 Selective Fire Rifle, 5.56 times 45mm NATO, used by the United States Navy SEALs during the Vietnam War. Heckler and Conch. G3, 7.62 times 51mm NATO rifle, U.S. Army Rangers in the mid-1970s and by the U.S. Navy SEALs from 1980. NSN 1005-12-140-9436. Armalite Colt Model 6061, 5.56 times 45mm NATO rifle, USAF and SOF use only. XM22E1 rifle, selective fire rifle, 5.56 times 45mm NATO. MK4 Mod 0 suppressed rifle times 5.6 times 45mm NATO. Miscellaneous M1 grenade variants E1 through E6 and E9 through E14 semi-automatic rifle .30-06. MK2 Mod 012 semi-automatic rifle 7.62 times 51mm NATO. M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle .30-06. M1941 Johnson rifle semi-automatic rifle .3-06 model 45A. M1946 rifle, M1947 Johnson auto carbine semi-automatic rifle .30-6. Pedersen rifle .276. Pedersen device attachment to Springfield M1903 .30 conversion. M1918 bar .030-6 Armalite AR-18. MK12 Mod 01 Special Purpose Rifle 5.56.45mm NATO US Navy USMC SOCOM. NGSW-R Next Generation Squad Weapon Rifle 6.8 common cartridge. Sig Saucer MCX Spear Rifle and cartridge selected and ordered by the US Army as an XM7 rifle and 6.8 common cartridge. MRGGA mid-range gas gun assaulter 6.5mm Creedmoor USSO-COM. MK17 Mod 1 FN Scar-H 6.5mm Creedmoor USSO-COM. LMT Mars-H 6.5 DMR 6.5mm Creedmoor USSO-COM. LaRue Tactical Predator 6.5 Creedmoor 6.5mm Creedmoor USSO-COM. M4A1 5.56 times 45mm NATO. XM7 6.8 times 51mm US Army. M4 5.56 times 45mm NATO. MK16 Mod 0 5.56 times 45mm NATO US Army Rangers. MK18 Mod 0 CQBR Close Quarters Battle Receiver 5.56 times 45mm NATO USM Recon, USCG, DSF, USM SEALs, USO-COM, and USA SOC. M231 FPW Firing Port Weapon 5.56 times 45mm NATO US Army Bradley M2A3 Crew. The GAU-5A ASDW Air Crew Self-Defense Weapon 5.56 45mm NATO US Air Force. FNIWS 6.5 times 45mm NATO .264 LICC. US Com FN Scar-L CQC STD 5.56 times 45mm NATO US Army Rangers. USSO-COM Heckler and Koch 40 HK 416 5.56 times 45mm NATO JSOC. Low visibility assault weapon USSO-COM. Sig Saucer MCX Rattler reduced signature assault rifle USSO-COM. Colt Model 723 carbine version of M16A2 5.56 times 45mm NATO US Navy. M4E2 carbine automatic carbine 5.56 times 45mm NATO. CAR-15 survival rifle 5.56 times 45mm. Colt Model 653 carbine version of M16A1 5.56 times 45mm NATO. GAU-5A and AA SMG .556 times 45mm. XM177E1 and XM177E2 SMG 5.56 times 45mm. Colt Model 733 5.56 times 45mm NATO USMC Force Recon. XM23 carbine selective fire carbine 5.56 times 45mm NATO. GGU-4 P arm gun, .221 Remington Fireball, Car 15 SMG, Car 15 with 10-inch barrel, 5.56 millimeters, Car-15 carbine, M16 with 15-inch barrel, 5.56 times 45 millimeters, AR-7, .22 LR, M1, M1A1 carbine, semi-automatic carbine, .30 carbine, M2 carbine, fully automatic carbine, .30 carbine, M3 carbine, infrared scope, fully automatic carbine, .30 carbine, Thompson light rifle, fully automatic carbine, .30 carbine, M50 resin, T830 M4 survival rifle, .22 Hornet, T39 M6 survival rifle, .22 Hornet, .410 gauge, MA1 AR-5 survival rifle, .22 Hornet, M1 M1892 M1896 M1898 M1899 carbine, also known as Krag bolt action carbine, .30 to .40 Krag. Then M1873, M1877, M1879, M1884, M1886 carbine, .45 to 70, Gov, .45, 55, 405, and .45-70-500, Smith carbine, breech loader break open, .50, 50, 50, 30, 360, Burnside carbine, breech loader, .50, 60, 500, Star carbine, breech loader, .54, Springfield model 1863 breech barrel carbine, .52 caliber, individual carbine, U.S. Army, XM8 compact carbine, 5.56 times 45 millimeter, M500 pump action 12 gauge, M590 pump action 12 gauge, M590A1 pump action 12 gauge, Sega-12 USCG various military police units, M870 pump action 12 gauge, USCG and USAF, M1014 semi-automatic 12 gauge, US Army and USMC, M26 modular accessory shotgun system, bolt action 12 gauge attachment, US Army, Ithaca Model 37 pump action 12 gauge, Panacore jackhammer gas operated 12 gauge, Remington 7188 full auto 12 gauge Navy SEALs, Remington Model 10 pump action 12 gauge, Remington Model 11 semi-automatic 12 gauge, Remington Model 31 pump action 12 gauge, Springfield Model 1A81 Forager 20 gauge, Stevens Model 52030 pump action 12 gauge, Stevens Model 620 pump action 12 gauge, Winchester 1200 pump action 12 gauge, Winchester Model 1912 pump action 12 gauge, Winchester Model 1897 pump action 12 gauge, CAWS entrance, specifically HK Cause, Maxwell Achichian AA12 semi-automatic full automatic 12 gauge, USS OCOM primary USN SEALs, B&T APC-9 Pro K subcompact weapon, SCW 9x19 mm military police, U.S. Air Force, Heckler & Koch MP5-N, MP5K-N, MP5SD-N 9x19 mm USS OCOM, Heckler & Koch MP7A1 4.6x30 mm DevGru JSOC, Sig Sauer MPX 9x19 mm U.S. Army JSOC, Colt RO635 SMG 9x19 mm USMC, HK SMG 2 9x19 mm Parabellum never issued, HK 54A1 9x19 mm Parabellum never issued, HK MP 2000 9x19 mm Parabellum never issued, M3-M3A1 grease gun .45 ABC 9x19 mm Parabellum, Madsen M50 9x19 mm Parabellum, Walther MPL MPK 9x19 mm Parabellum, MK24 Mod 0 Smith & Wesson Model 76 9x19 mm Parabellum, Carl Gustav M45 9x19 mm Parabellum, Model 5055 Resin .45 ACP, M2 submachine gun, Hyde Inland M2 .45 ACP, M42 submachine gun, United Defense M4 .45 ACP 9x19mm Parabellum, M1A1 Thompson 45 ACP, M1 1928, M1 1928A1 Thompson .45 ABC, M1921 Thompson .04 AC, not type classified, and then Uzi Mini Uzi times 9x19 Parabellum. List will be updated without congressional approval. List updated task to the Pentagon to add more military weapons if needed. Any individual convicted of federal or state crimes are banned from acquiring firearms of every kind, and individual convicted of state and federal crimes will have all licenses and firearms confiscated without compensation. Basically, this list is just not to be confusing, because there are some firearms some people like hunting rifles or shotguns that one should have for self-defense. That includes, I say, handguns as well, but there is a very long list of weapons that ordinary citizens could have, and this is what the current list should be. And it should be updated with without congressional approval, but the Pentagon should be updating it. And no, I should have added that too, none of this can be taken off. Once it's on this list, it's not coming off.
Hello, folks. This is a segue from the Second Amendment. I'm just here to add on to the information. Like, I know I should have said something about the reason why I mostly believe this should be revision is to make sure, prevent, people with mental disorders from getting weapons automatically. Because let's be honest, that is a big issue in today's current climate where, mentally ill individuals who want to commit, mass murder, going out, buying weapons and then doing it within a month. I know there's been some issues in the recent months where kids just, grab, their parents' weapons and, try to commit crimes with them. That is a separate issue that probably has to be addressed at some point. I'm not sure if, punishing the parents for possible crimes is a thing. I know one case recently where the parents were charged with, accessory to murder. That's a start. But for, kids, stealing their parents' weapons and, trying to commit crimes, that is definitely a gray area that needs to be addressed. And yes, when it comes to military weapons, only military people should be using them because they have the expertise. A average citizen like me who is not a military person should not be able to just walk into a gun store and buy a military grade weapon. Because let's be honest, those weapons are only made for one purpose only. Killing other people as quickly as possible. They're not really for self-defense. That's what a handgun's for. So there needs to be better. So yes, that is exactly what this mostly revision is about, is about making sure the right people get the right weapons. And yes, we should not be inconveniencing those who actually are responsible gun owners. Hence why, I say we grandfather those in who are responsible. They can walk in, get their license, don't have to pay money, and they can keep buying all the weapons they want because, well, they've proved they've been responsible for years. Why does that need to suddenly change? So, yeah, I know there's probably some other issues going to happen, like, what about those who, eventually, have restraining orders or something? That's something else we need to elaborate on. But I say for the most part, this revision, I say yes, it is supposed to be tangible, you're supposed to be discussing it. But I think this is a good start when it comes to actually making sure the Second Amendment, actually protects responsible gun owners and prevents, further crimes from happening. So I say this is a start, and I hope people will have a nice, friendly, frank discussion about it. Thank you.